can we find bread for them to eat? Now, may I tell you that this question confused the disciples. Yeah, that question messed them up, because over 5,000 folks is following Jesus, and Jesus turned to them and said, guys, where are we going to find bread for them to eat? Where are we going to find food to give to these individuals? And the disciples, they are now confused. They are now perplexed, because they can't understand why Jesus is asking them this question. But can I tell you this, what I love about the text? That Jesus knew the motive of the individuals following him, but he still loved them. That Jesus loved them in spite of them. Jesus knew that they were not following him for the right reason, but he still wanted to provide for them. He still wanted to take care of them. And that's some of us, brethren, if we are not lying, that God knows our motive. God knows our intention, but he still loves us. He still wants to take care of us. He still wants to provide for us. The Bible says Jesus turned to his disciples and asked them, where can we find bread for them to eat? Brethren, I want you to know that I share in the confusion of the disciples. If I was there with them, I would be confused just like them, because Jesus is asking me, where can I find bread for over 5? I don't know of any bakery that can bake that amount of bread. Jesus is asking us, where can we find bread for them to eat? Now, you see, this is the thing. If it were 15 people, I can understand. We can take care of that. If it was 50 people, we can still manage to take it. Even if it was 500, that would be all right. But it's over 5,000 folks, and Jesus is turning to me. Where can we find bread for them to eat? Brethren, what's even more troubling in the text is that Jesus is the one asking the question. Usually, when we are confused, we go to Jesus. But Jesus is the one in the text asking, where can we find bread for them to eat? Brethren, I think Jesus would have been better off asking Canaan that question. That if Jesus asked Canaan that question, I'm sure that they would have found a way to feed that 5,000 individuals. The way they love food here, oh my God. I'm sure. But Jesus turned to the disciples and he said, where can we buy bread for them to eat? And everyone, brethren, they were confused, because Jesus is asking them this question, and now we have a real problem on our hands. We have a real situation on our hands. In fact, we have a situation that doesn't seem to make any sense. How are we going to meet the need of this crowd? Well, of course, some of the disciples said, Jesus, we got some solution. One of them said, Jesus, what we can do is we can send them away. And I believe that's reasonable. If you can't feed them, let them go their way. You know, that's too much folks to feed, Jesus. Let's send them. Let's send them away. Then Philip rose up and said, Jesus, well, if we can't send them away, I have another solution, but I don't even think that will work. Because even if we try to raise funds for those folks, I don't think it's going to be enough money. If we try to raise money for them to buy bread, I still don't even think, Jesus, that we will raise enough money to get enough bread for those folks. And then here comes Andrew. Andrew is popping in, and Andrew said, Jesus, I saw a young lad with 5 loaves and 2 fish. But then Andrew said, Jesus, what can that do? 5 loaves and 2 fishes with 5,000 individuals. We are absolutely certain that can feed them. And the situation just doesn't seem to make any sense to us, because you want to feed them, but we don't have what it takes to feed them. You want to provide for them, but we have so little, Jesus. Jesus, we cannot feed those folks. Before I go on, I know they told me that I was in Canaan. I never knew I was in London. The place is absolutely rocking up here. But the Bible says that Jesus told them, find a place for them to sit down. Now listen. I just couldn't understand this as I read this, because we just explained to Jesus that we don't have enough bread, we can't raise enough money, We don't know where we're going to find food to provide for them. And the next thing Jesus said is, tell them to sit down. Jesus, I mean, be real. We just told you we can't provide for them. And here now you coming on the scene. We expect you to say, all right, well, tell them to go home. We'll see them another day. You tell us to tell them to find a place to sit down. So now you are giving the people expectation. And in our minds, we don't even know how this thing is going to work. We don't know how we are going to meet the need of this crowd. But brethren, I'm so glad because we find ourselves in verse number 11. Yeah, we made our way through the text and we found ourselves in verse number 11. And while before, brethren, we had the manipulative crowd, while before in the text we saw the clueless disciples, in verse number 11, we are presented with the simple solution. Yes. In verse number 11, we are presented with the simple solution. Now, I just got excited when I read the text and I got to verse number 11, because in verse number 11, we have the clear explanation. In verse number 11, we have what is called the divine defining moment. In verse number 11, we have the anointed apex. In verse number 11, we have the Christological climax. In verse number 11 is where the Spirit spotlight is shining. In verse number 11, we have the providential pinnacle. In verse number 11, we are presented with the heavenly height. It's small, but it's significant. It's quick, but I hope you catch it. That two words in verse number 11 is going to shift the story from painful to purposeful. Two words in verse number 11 is going to shift the story from hopeless to hopeful. That two words in verse number 11 is going to shift the story from starvation to satisfaction. That two words in verse number 11 is going to shift the story from frustrated to being full. And these two words is, then you're not reading it. The Bible says, then Jesus. We were trying to figure out this thing all along, but verse number 11 says, oh, yeah, y'all are with me tonight. That the Bible says, then Jesus. It didn't make sense before, but when we get to verse number 11 and the text says, then Jesus, we just relax our minds because we know that Jesus have this under control. A way was made, but how? Then Jesus. Jesus, and I don't know about you, brethren, but we have all had some then Jesus moments in our lives. When we have been going down the wrong road, then Jesus saved us. When we have been stuck in situation, then Jesus showed. We have all had some then Jesus moments that we can testify to. And this situation, it didn't make any sense. But then Jesus. Yeah, then Jesus showed up and Jesus said, listen, I'm going to take care of everything. Now stay with me, stay with me. Now the word then speaks of time. But the word then, in fact, let me get this right. The word then speaks of comparison. But the word then speaks of time. And when we look at our lives, I'm sure we can testify to the fact that we've all had some testing times. We've all had some tedious times. We've all had some tumultuous times. We've all had some trying times. We've all had some terrifying times. We've all had some tornado-like times. And just when we were about to break, then Jesus showed up. I don't know about you, brethren, but I'm so glad that I serve Jesus Christ, because every time I think that I'm going to fall apart, Jesus shows up. Every time I think things is not going to work out, Jesus shows up. I'm so glad that I serve Jesus Christ. Just when I was on the brink of breaking, when I was on the course to collapse, when I was destined for devastation, Jesus shows up and he turns my sadness into singing. He turns my jungle into joy. He turns my worry into worship, because Jesus intervened and fixed the situation. Amen. We've all had some then Jesus moments in our lives. But when we look at the text, before verse 11, we had little. But after verse 11, we have leftovers. Oh my God. That before verse 11, we had little. But after verse 11, we have leftovers. And the story drastically changed because Jesus intervened. Oh yeah. That the story would have had a different ending had it not been for Jesus coming in the picture. That this story would have read a whole different way if Jesus did not show up and fix the situation. And that's the Jesus we are serving. That's the God we are serving, brethren. And that's the Jesus Christ we come to tell you of tonight. A Jesus that is able to fix situation that doesn't make sense. When you are confused, Jesus can fix it. The Bible says that Jesus fixed the situation. But the text says, then Jesus. But I don't want you to miss the other words in the text because it's significant. Then Jesus, the Bible said, took the loaves. Now I'm sure that Jesus took it in a respectful manner. Yeah, I'm sure Jesus didn't just grab the loaves and so forth from that young lad. That Jesus took it in a respectful manner. But I don't really want us to be caught up on how Jesus took it. I want us to be focused on the fact that Jesus took it. Don't focus on the way Jesus took it. Focus on the fact that Jesus took it. Now I've dropped by tonight to tell you that this story would have been different had it not been for Jesus taking it. That this story would have had a different outcome if this 5 loaves and 2 fishes was not in the hands of Jesus Christ. That this story would have been a whole different way, brethren, if it had not